Yes, hello everybody. I thought due to the last full moon, oh, something's open here. I'm sorry. Let's just close everything that says bloom bloom. And due to the last full moon, well, it's always something that I observe when we are online together. We observe each other's craziness be contagious, and we start to observe, well, at least I think what I feel is perhaps also a bit of a negative focus on the full moon phases and the moon in general. And there's this thing with people who are more or less moon sick. You know, we have that kind of moon sick energy going on, and 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 I understand it. But from a medical perspective and from a healing perspective, there are things with the moon phases that I think astrologers will start to understand and use more creatively in the years to come, especially now when we have more and more neurological information. We have more and more information about how the brain works and how we as human beings are being affected by the different rhythms of life. Many of these things that we experience during the full moon is challenging because it's like an overstimulation of your energy field, and it will just fuel um, everything that you have on the inner levels that are undigested or subconscious or in any way um, a challenge for you, energetically speaking. We are trying to solve the riddle of being energy beings. That's why we look to astrology, for instance, which is definitely us trying to figure out who are we and what is the driving engine in our particular selves. What is the what is the who am I from an energetical point of view, and therefore how can I master the art of living and living healthy, and despite karmic issues, of course, which we have to consider as something that perhaps is not within our capacity to solve during one lifetime, and therefore we have relative influence over our own lives. But we do have a creative potential, and from an esoteric point of view, which is my meditation practice, it has its foundation in this Kala Chakra Tantra, which is the wheel of time, the understanding of the cycles, and especially the lunar cycles, which is the fundament in both Tibetan and Chinese astrology, for instance. And therefore, you know, there are these different moon phases that I thought I'd share. I'm not an expert by all means. I know quite a bit about the full moon meditations and how to utilize the energy for our benefit. And but other than that, these subjects are not completely available to us, especially the Tibetan astrology. According to what I've understood, it is so, it's written in such a language that you have to be a master of Tibetan astrology to really understand it. So I'm not trying to understand it completely, but I'm just trying to learn from a different perspective. And that different perspective comes from a meditation practice that is an integral part of a person's life, instead of us in the West being more personality oriented. There are less focus on the personality and more focus on spiritual development in Eastern cultures, especially the Tibetan one. And therefore, controlling the mind through meditation, practicing moon rituals, um, seeing them as an opportunity for growth on a spiritual level, you know, just is part of their awareness of life. It is almost like we from the West, we're trying to strengthen our ego. Then you can sort of say that the people from the East are trying to do the exact opposite. They're trying to diminish the influence of the lower bodies, as we like to call them, over the consciousness. And you know, I in a non-dual world, I would love to include both. As we know, especially if we've worked a little bit with Neptune, etc., there's a point to having an ego in our world. You know, today we see the East and the West are coming together in a way, and you have that phenomenon that I've been particularly interested in, which is the Yogi in New York phenomenon. And that is the one who's able to both transcend and include. Like there can be some world distance in the Tibetan way of seeing things, right? And we can be too much involved in the world, so we sort of need each other in a way. And especially today, especially astrologers today, we have, I think we have a pretty big responsibility in how we communicate our profession online and in the social medias. And especially when it's related to the full moon, like sometimes, not always, I mean, there's a lot of good information out there, but sometimes you get that feeling like it's hyped up. And I'm like, okay, so we're 7 billion people affecting each other. And if we're all going to go into that massive hype up moon phase, we're going to go crazy, all of us. Like it's going to be real lunatic moments, because it's almost like none of us will be sleeping, you know, like because we affect each other and we strengthen the same the tendencies in each other. And you look at the world today, it's lunatic, right? There's some lunar energies that are going crazy, and I'll explain in a while. I made a little PowerPoint presentation, and I'll explain in a while what I mean with the lunar bodies. And it is like they are starting to dominate us instead of the other way around, which is always, you know, the goal of any meditation is to create some sense of order on the inner levels so that clarity can be achieved, and thus what we call meditation, enlightenment, inspiration, intuition can start to flow in a better way for us, and we will become then more compassionate and more helpful and more happy in our own lives. So it's not a point, you know, um, you know, there are some misconceptions around the full moon that I think, you know, I'm not the one with all the answers, but I thought it would be interesting to share with you. So I'm going to share this little PowerPoint presentation that I made, which is, you know, I was so lucky to have this beautiful picture of a friend of mine. There we go. She took this beautiful photo. The yellow line is not a part of it. When it is a magnetic energy, when you look at the moon, it's like it's taking a hold on your energy field, and it's, if you're sensitive to energies, you can sort of feel the pull. You know, you can feel it's pulling you, and that's why a lot of people, they're overstimulated at this time. But it's not the moon that is stimulating them per se, you know, it is the relationship between the sun, which is the light, and the moon. The moon is a mirror of the sunlight. It is therefore, you know, it's hard to sleep when there's almost, you know, a bright sunlight, this cold sunlight that is the moonlight. You know, it's really cold, it's silvery, it has a different quality. It's more moist, it's deeper, it's a different kind of light, but it's a mirror to the sun. And the sun is the soul, the sun is the life itself. And if it hadn't been for the moon, physically speaking, we wouldn't have any weather on Earth. It would be, you know, we'd be free of weather. So the moon has something to do with moving things, with changing things. It has to do with these deep rhythms that is life. When we look at the moon in a chart, we're looking at the the one that triggers everything else. It moves so quickly. In, it's like a clock where you have the one showing the seconds. That's the moon, and um, it is so. There is this actually this very interesting physical thing with the moon. It is that it's moving away from Earth. It used to be much closer. And if you think of human evolution, you know, where it came um, from an evolutionary point of view in terms of consciousness, we were more instinctual. We had less power over ourselves. We were more animals than we are now. The more mentally polarized a human being is, the more control that person has over his or her reactions to things. And it is a hope that humanity will free itself from these influences which are based on what we call genetic past. You know, in evolutionary astrology, you know, it's very in harmony with the Tibetan philosophies. We know Jeffrey Wolf Green, he traveled to the East and he met a monk who gave him a lot of information, evidently. I don't know exactly how that was transmitted to him, either through telepathy or conversations. And we know that every astrologer in Tibet is a monk. It's a practicing monk. They don't use astrology like we do to measure their personality. They use it to find that spiritual rhythm so that they can meditate and perform the right kinds of rituals under the right kinds of moon phases so that they can reach their connection with the higher sources, with you know, the upper levels, beyond the illusions, beyond the weather. So, you know, it's not perhaps interesting for everyone, but when we look at when we are looking through the perspective of astrology, I think most of us are trying to improve ourselves. We're trying to improve our own lives, and we're trying to heal whatever's in our past. So necessarily, you know, having the ability to at one point, instead of solving everything, just completely moving into a deeper ritual, um, and activating the higher mind through these rituals, you will actually see eventually that these patterns of the past, they simply dissolve. Now, I'm not saying that psychotherapy doesn't really work and we don't need it and stuff like that. There's time and space for everything. But the new psychology, which we are seeing the beginning of today, will involve meditation. And, in my opinion, also astrology. Most definite. Because if through the astrology you can see these holes, you could see very easily the sensitive times an individual is going through, and you can give health advice based on that, functional healthy advice based on exactly what periods will be challenging, for instance, related to karmic patterns, etc. And in this way, we can be preventing a lot of new trauma to happen, especially if we start also to assign certain meditations for each astrological chart. Yes, so these are the moon phases. We are probably all familiar with this. I wanted to find something that sort of showed the relationship between the sun and the moon, but it was rather difficult. I couldn't find it. I guess Google wouldn't refuse to understand what I was looking for. So, but it is, you could probably just visualize it as this huge radiating bowl of fire that is sending out its massive energies towards the sun. I have something that is the eclipse here, no, towards the moon. And you can see, you know, the eclipse is where the sun gets in the way. So either the sun gets in the way or the moon gets in the way of of the light of life. And it is these complete rebootings, these eclipses, as you can see. But this is also, very, the solely lunar relationship is something that we hear a lot about in different kinds of astrologies, like Dane Rudhyar, which has also been a big source of inspiration for the EA community. And you see the solely lunar relationship, especially around the lunar nodes. And there is this whole thesis about us moving away from the moon and moving towards our conscious expression, which is the sun. So there is something with the past, the present, and the future, which is embodied in this solar-lunar relationship. And for us to work from a healing perspective with these things, it is very necessary to understand what exactly is the moon. Is it something that we, you know, is it a tendency we should linger in, or is it something that we should actually put a little effort into evolving away from, or refining, or polishing? Often when I think of the south node of the moon, and you have the moon in relation to the south node of the moon, the path of least resistance, I often think of it as a diamond that needs to be, you need to brush off the dust on it, because it's sort of like the path of least resistance. It's going into the instinctual sides of the signs that it's in, and it's sort of, it moves through more instinctual, primitive channels. It's not necessarily something conscious in us. We are more or less instinctually reacting. And of course, if you have people who are not connected to their moons, you have people who, well, like the Tibetan lamas, who are completely detached from their personal needs. So we need to have a relationship to the moon. It's just a matter of refining the expression both on the south node and on the moon. We're trying to build up health in our lives. We're trying to build up vitality. That's what we're actually trying to build up. And if there's too much up and down, always going up, coming down, going up, coming down, you don't have the steadiness that is required to maintain health. We think health is something that is lucky. People are lucky. They're healthy, they're lucky. Maybe they're genetically blessed. I can be blessed with a very good immunity system. I have Mars in Taurus. I'm pretty, I'm holding, I have like a steadiness in my energy field that sort of provides me with the stability that I need to maintain a pretty good vitality. And I'm born with Sun conjunct Jupiter. Some might call that, I don't know if you've seen Asterix, but he fell in his buddy Obelix is a big, huge dude. He doesn't need the drops of strength because he fell in the pot when he was a kid. And that's the Sun Jupiter conjunction. Like there's a lot of vitality going on there. And being energetic it could be also like a problem, because you'd be overstimulated all the time. It's like you're walking around in a constant full moon phase. We're talking the sun. We're talking vital energy. We're talking life. And if you have too much energy going through certain centers, there's blockage in some centers and full opening in others, you'd have a challenge with hyperactivity. You could have a challenge with burnout syndromes due to challenges with calming down again, etc. So being hyperstimulated is not, it's not what we're aiming for. Vitality is the golden midpoint. It is that place between rest and activity, that place between pushing yourself and allowing yourself to just chill. And that is, how we are affected emotionally through the cycles of the moon. It's very interesting because it affects our health a lot. If you have a very emotional day, if you're going through like a massive Pluto transit, or like you're through those difficult years just before the Saturn return, or going through a Chiron return or having some sort of massive spiritual crisis in your life where everything is healed and purified, you can get to a point where it's starting to drain your energy to be too involved in the processes. If you've cried an entire day, you feel exhausted afterwards. So emotions are good, but to a certain degree. We have to know when to stop. I have a Cancer daughter, and she goes into her emotions, and she's like, eh. And I just have to find the right time to take her out of the emotions again. I don't want to suppress them, right? That would just make my work afterwards, well, would take twice as long, But I would love to find a way to sort of take her over into a smoother flow, both for her and, of course, for her environment. And these moon phases, they, medically speaking, the moon, well, it is, it is interesting to see, especially the medical, it's everything fluid, as I mentioned. It's I'm not sure if I wrote that correctly. Well, it's the hormonal balance. The physical mind is Noel Till's suggestion. He's done a lot of work in medical astrology. I recommend it. But he suggests that the mind, the physical mind, not the consciousness, the electricity that goes through it, but the physical mind, due to its gooey, jelly-like nature, is related to the moon. But what most people in the medical field of astrology seem to agree on is that emotions, stomach, limbic system, every kind of reactive, impulsive pattern related to the nervous system, and then how they again make the entire body react because of the glandular activities in the hormones. So we're very much tied into to our bodies. We're sort of captured here, and part of why we're captured in our bodies is because of these energies that we are seeing life through, experiencing life through. So it's something with the stomach in particular. It has to do with digestion and being able to digest whatever life experience comes to us. We have to know what to put aside, what is worth focusing on, and what to actually take into our system, what is nourishing us. So it has to do with us being able to have a nourishing relationship to life. Now, of course, being human, I can most certainly say that, wow, that is definitely something of a challenge. The opposite sign to Cancer is Capricorn. Capricorn is the master. It's also a sign of nurturance and caring. The master is caring. It's the fatherly, motherly energy. It's like the parental guide that says, never mind, don't worry, and on the other side says, these are just emotions, get over it. That's the tough love of Capricorn. You don't need that. It's just killing you. So through these Capricorn Cancer polarity, we are regulating our life cycles. We are regulating our lives. We are figuring out when little is too little and when too much is too much, right? But the science of life demands a certain rhythm. It's what keeps me vital. It's the rhythmic life. Meditation, of course, is part of that. It's what I need. So, you're trying to understand your needs. If anything, the moon cycles shows us that there is this everyday rhythm, 2.5 days the moon spends in each sign. And one lunar day, it's, that's how the Tibetans view their calendar. They start the month, 1 month, 1 moon, with 0 degrees, and through the 15th degree to the full moon, where the window, the gates are open, where the light is fueled into the system with no limitation. It's like a full set of life force energy. You have half a moon in the Tibetan system, and then you have the waxing, the waning phase from the full moon to the new moon again. And they split up this moon with different kinds of rhythms. Sometimes they see, okay, here we have, these days are good for beneficial for that kind of practice. These days will be obscured. It won't be good days to have contact. At the full moon, it's recommended that you meditate. Don't eat meat, for instance. You live a life that is more um, focused on gaining contact with your soul. And that's why in esoteric traditions, as you probably, if some of you who are friends with me on Facebook, you probably see that every full moon I post these Raya Yoga thought seeds. And I use, today we had a Sagittarius full moon, this full moon. The moon was in Gemini, but the sun, the soul that was fueling into the moon was in Sagittarius, right? So that's one of the things that I think perhaps should be more, enlightened in our way of understanding astrology, is that it is the sun that is fueling life into the moon. The moon is in a player in relation to the sun and earth. And this is what could be, what I'm Aquarian. I'm like, yeah, that'd be a scientific life to understand this. And I try to, when we are talking about ourselves as I feel and I should, like we are trying to get to know us, ourselves and our needs, which is very, very important in this particular phase in life. I think the best way of approaching it is completely scientific. Okay, so, all right, so there you have like a trauma that's being reintroduced into your conscious field, and yeah, how would you approach it? It's an energy. You have to deal with it. And how do you deal with it? Should you over identify with it, or should you perhaps take a little step back and try to see whether or not you can do something constructive or healing with this? Truly healing would be dissolving the pattern, right? And that's what I think most of us are trying to figure out. We've gone through therapies and we tried to sort of fix ourselves, and we seem to be at the same full moon. You're coming back again, and it's the same thing, so at one point humanity has to look upwards. And Michael Erlevin, which is a very interesting astrologer, because he spent a lot of time, I picked up a lot from his teachings, and he spent a lot of time trying to understand the Tibetan astrology, and he gets to the essence of why the Tibetans use astrology. I will just quote him. What I'm getting here is that the primary tool for learning astrology in the Tibetan system is not a set of ephemerides, a series of calculations and research in books. Instead, it involves establishing this inner connectivity. Call it intuition, meditation, mind practice, mind training, whatever. And for me, I don't know if it's like that for everyone, but for me, that's just an incredibly liberating perspective on things. And we know that, we are in one of the best gifts that evolutionary gives the world, evolutionary astrology gives to the world, and especially to the community of astrology, is exactly the evolutionary stages, from consensus to individuated to spiritual. Although there's a lot of work to be done on these stages, especially related to the spiritual stages, I think, especially understanding, that the vast majority of humanity is still very focused on what we would call the personality, trying to become aware of. Consensus is ruled by mostly Saturn and the moon, I'd say. Most people put Saturn there. I'd throw in the moon, definitely. Instinctual past, genetic past. My people The dark side of cancer is homeland security, is providing, fear, fear of fear of losing the self, of losing one's culture, losing one's values. And it is that attachment to the biological karma, and the instinctual emotional responsiveness. As I'm writing here, patterns of early family conditioning and conformistic sociological behavior, all lunar influenced. And it's very, very strongly integrated into mass consciousness. So astrologers, which are sort of like the priests of this time, we are secular priests. We are, in a way, secular priests. We are dealing with science when we're dealing with astrology, although not science as we are used to viewing science, because it's based on these fundamental. Science today is not embracing the totality of life in its full expression. So therefore, astrology is not included. But when that will happen, astrology will be included. The cycles, the rhythms, the patterns, especially the rhythmic life. And as healers, we have this opportunity to to show us how we can sort of solve the riddle. We are so contagious on each other's energy fields. So it's each person who has that particular ability to at one point walk the path of dharma in a way, get away from that biological prison. These people will have massive influence on humanity. They will be centered in love, and that is not an instinctual response. Love is a conscious response. It's the sun. It sees everything. It doesn't really have to fix everything. It's not like that. The moon has to fix everything. It's like, this is making me feel unsafe. I have to fix it, right? The sun is saying, I'm radiating in every direction. I don't, I'm just throwing light everywhere. It is centered in the space deep inside. So it is just throwing its light everywhere. It sees everything. So it's really, a slight difference. Like, it's almost like us, we humans, we have that ability, like we're being pushed upwards. That is the evolution, right? We're being pushed upwards. Like, okay, so now we've been instinctual response mechanisms, the solar plexus, right? And you felt that uneasiness in your stomachs from time to time when you're really feeling confronted or you're feeling challenged in any way, and how the hormones are starting to feed into your blood system, etc. You're losing connection. Perhaps you're losing connection to what's good and true and beautiful. Perhaps you're losing connection to your own safety. Perhaps something else is starting to happen. Something is, like there's an astral energy that is starting to take over. And when we talk about astral energy, we're talking about emotional energy. In the astral field of humanity, there is so much going on. It is the most alive place on the entire planet, and most of us aren't trained to see it properly. That's where Santa lives. Donald Duck came out of the astral, the imaginations in a negative sense and in a positive sense, and emotions that are always changing. And the Tibetan, they spent, thousands of years observing the moon phases. So, in esoteric astrology and in esoteric meditation healing techniques, we keep mostly to the full moon phase. Right now, we're in the full moon phase. We're at the other side of the full moon, where we're starting to share out the energy again, from the build up to the sharing. Yeah. So, but we're still in that full moon phase. So there's particular interesting thing going on. I take everything that happens in the full moon phase as, as sort of like a measure of where I am in relation to my karmic patterns, for instance. How much influence are they having over me? What are their magnetic hold? I told you, the moon is taking a hold of our magnetic fields and it's sort of swaying us a little bit. Whereas the sun symbol, it has a dot in the middle. You've seen that, right? circle with the dot. Now it proves, that that's why sun is consciousness. It's the circle. It includes everything, but it's also the center in the middle. It's your will to stay. Don't move, just see, observe, transcend, include that, those kinds of things. And it's really, if you make it a spiritual practice, if you live this rhythmic life that the Tibetans suggest, I can assure you with 100% that everything that you try to change inside of you will start to change. But it takes a little, it demands that discipline that many people find difficult. It demands those techniques that we don't have perhaps available. It demands often company that is also not available. And since most of humanity is still focused in the instinctual realm, they're not so interested in meditation. We are interested in the next little high, the next little sensation, the next little kick, the next little reward, the sleep, the sex, the food, the worrying that you don't have enough sex, sleep, or food. Like there's this kind of separative state of mind. And Jeffrey Wolf Green writes a lot about that in Pluto. I think that's one of his most brilliant points, is that Pluto, he says, is that dual principle of the soul. One part is just separating. It wants to get as far away from the soul as possible. And it's exhausting its desires one by one, which is a common feature of the Scorpio evolution. And then little by little, it sees that there's only one way, and it's coming back home again. Now, I've mentioned that before. I think, there is room for refinement when it comes to Pluto and the soul and the relationship between the actors of the chart. But the moon is definitely involved in this process of being pulled into separative desires. We need the moon, though. That's the dilemma. So we have to figure out how to find the middle way. Now, the 30-day cycle, they have the Tibetan, I love this, the Tibetan have this concept of lunar gaps, which is something I learned through Michael Erlewine, by the way. And it's something of days that are more or less clouded. You can't seem to get in touch with whatever is there. You have those days, right, where you're just, this is a shitty day, right? And they've observed these, I don't know which days are the lunar gaps, but there's this sense of being obscured by something, like there is no real contact. In healing, there was a guy who wrote a book called Reconnected Healing, and he said the entire thing with healing, and I know this from the healing that I do, is that you have to connect with the source that is healing in order to heal. And you have to reconnect that person that you're trying to heal with their source, with their sun, And this is what we can use the lunar phases for. So the full moon phase in particular is these 5 days before and after the peak. You've noticed that every aspect in the astrological transits, when they're at their build-up phase, when they're building up, they are more intense. It's like before they are exact, they have like a crisis point, right? And then they are exact, and it's like a dissolving point afterwards. And it's like, it's just the new cycle. It's so, and then it dissolves, and you get to share whatever you learned. But the crisis